In this video, we're going to talk about how you can divide multi-digit decimals. To do that, we're going to learn an algorithm for doing so, and we're also going to use lots of long division. I'm not going to go over how to do long division in this video, though you will see some examples where I use it. So if that's something that you need to learn first, go find a video about that, then come back to this one. We're going to do two examples. One's going to be a little bit harder than the second one. And then I'm going to leave you with some suggested practice problems. So if you look at the first problem, we're going to be dividing a number with a decimal, by a whole number. So we have 32.4 divided by 4. What we want to make sure we do is start by writing our long division problem out. So our dividend is 32.4. And our divisor is 4. Remember, the dividend always goes on the inside. The divisor always goes on the outside. We also have our decimal point here, and we're just going to put it right above where it is currently. So it's going to be right there. Next, we're going to just do long division like you normally would. 4 doesn't go into 3 times, so we can put a 0 here. Some people like to put an X, I do a 0. Next, we're going to look at 4 into 32. We know that goes in 8 times, and that happens to go in exactly 32. So we'll subtract them, we get a 0. Now we have to deal with the 4. So we're going to drop the 4 down here. We're going to drop it like it's hot. And we're going to repeat that same process again. How many times does 4 go into 4? Well, it only goes in once. So we're going to put a 1 right there. 4 times 1 is 4. We subtract, and we get a 0. Now that we have a 0, and we have no other digits up here, we know that we're done. Our solution to this problem is 8.1. If you happen to be doing this with a piece of paper, I would write that down because that might be relevant for the next problem. In the next example, we're going to talk about what happens if your divisor is a decimal or has a decimal value as well. So we would again start off the problem like we normally do. We again have 32.4. This time our divisor is 0.4. And it's not going to be really possible to try to figure out how many times 0.4 goes into 3. Yes, it's doable, but it might be a decimal, which means that we're going to have some problems up here. That means we got to do something first. What we're going to do is we're going to change our divisor. And we're going to change it by turning it into a whole number. We're going to move our decimal point to the right 1 place value. If we do that, we also have to do that to the decimal in the dividend. The reason that we can do this is because your place values are essentially powers of 10. So if you multiply by 10, you get another place value. By 10 again, you get another one, etc. You could also do this by dividing. And if we multiply or divide, in this case we're multiplying, our values by the same amount of tens, we're not actually going to change the problem. It'll stay the same, it'll just make it easier for us to solve. So after we've done that, we get a new problem that is just 4 as our divisor, and our dividend is now 324. We still have a decimal. We can put it up here. And you'll notice we don't have anything after the decimal. If you want, you can put a 0 here. Sometimes that's very useful. If it's going to be useful this time, we'll find out. That's the only different thing about dividing if your divisor is a decimal or has a decimal value in it. The rest of it is the same as normal long division. So again, how many times does 4 go into 3? It doesn't. 4 goes into 32 8 times. And if you look very carefully, you'll notice this problem is almost exactly the same as what we did in example 1. However, this time, our solution isn't 8.1, it's going to be 81. And that actually makes a lot of sense, because if you remember in this part where we had to change our decimal, we had to change our value, we multiplied essentially both values by 10. Our previous answer, for example 1, was 8.1, and if you multiply that by 10 as well, you get 81. So it still works, even though it seems maybe to some people like it shouldn't work, but it will work every time. So things to remember about dividing with decimals: use long division. You're going to need to use it. If you don't know how to use long division, look it up. You need to practice that. The other part is, if your divisor has a decimal point in it, it's some sort of non-whole value, move the decimal point so that you can make it a whole number. You then have to move the decimal in your dividend the same number of times. The reason we can do this is because we're really multiplying or dividing both values by 10 some number of times, depending on how far you need to move it, and that keeps our expressions the same, or equivalent at least. So I'm going to leave you with 3 practice problems. You don't have to do them. I would suggest them if you want to practice. Good luck.